Pacific. Okay, I'm just going to pick up my slides. So are you seeing this now?
Yes.
Okay, let's see if I can do this. You see the full presentation mode, just so I'm sure?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Yes, so good morning, I would say. We in Australia, it's kind of afternoon here. I'm also the vice chair of the ICA Asia Pacific Cooperative Research Committee. And so we and Naveen and Dr. Yashavante Dongre, we have been working together on setting up co-op colloquiums to spur and network researchers in the region, cooperative researchers in the region. So, and I just wanted to give a little pretext for why we chose this topic here today. First of all, it's the International Year of the Co-ops. I feel there's a big responsibility in some senses, because this is our chance to show what co-ops are able to do. And as researchers of co-ops, we have a particular responsibility to also provide research and evidence and and then case studies to describe or introduce not to the cooperative sector, but to the wider audience, to the world, so to speak, what the cooperative business model is able to do. And last year we had a research conference in Kerala, in Kozhikode, and it was primarily there that for me, because I'm still young in the Asia Pacific context, and young as a researcher, not young, but that I kind of became aware that I think we can do more to improve the case studies that are coming out of the Asia Pacific region. There are some powerful co-ops in the region, and I feel it's kind of, we're not doing it justice if we cannot improve the cases so that we can give them to the world, so to speak.
So we will get the interview communication.
I think we need to mute some people, participants. Yeah, okay. So, and what I registered, or what we registered, we were ranking papers, is that there's been a focus on description, problem solving, and history. And this is important for the sector. But it could be, we can maybe improve this to give it a wider audience. So I would consider this colloquium as a start of a discussion on how we can strengthen these case studies and how we can use them more to strengthen the case, that how good what the contribution the co-ops do make currently and what they are able to make. So I'll quickly, and Naveen, you have to stop me, and go through a few kind of slides, a few points on case study method and theory building. And then Garry Cronan is, of course, the main speaker today, who has done his PhD on comparative research of large co-ops across the globe. So we all know that co-ops are governed by the 7 cooperative principles and the cooperative values, which make them people-centered enterprises. They have dual purpose, looking at both economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations. And one of the things that I has kind of that I've picked up, and this is by Johnston Birchall, who was a very prominent cooperative researcher. He reviewed a lot of co-op researchers and came up with this kind of observation that the core principles have been developed both from practice, so practice, people, and often starting from indigenous organization, but also from philosophical underpinning, so values based on ethical and political justification. And that's a good thing. But he said this is maybe, this can also explain why there is limited research on this model, because it's kind of the research community, they want evidence, they want pure evidence, quantitative evidence, and so on. And they find it hard maybe to do research on cooperatives because there's values involved, there's philosophical and political underpinnings involved. So like maybe they don't want to do research because it's values involved. So what he also stated that the validity of cooperative principles is founded upon the experience and common sense of the many, and not on the revelation made to or by a few. And I think this is a little kick to us as academics to get down from our ivory tower, because doing good cooperative research is not so that we can sit and discuss theory in our universities going forward. It's for us to be to have both a practical and common sense perspective on our research, but also making it more accessible to the wider researcher audience. And why is case studies in cooperative research so important? Because it's often a preferred method. And in a way, I'll come back to that, but I think the International Year of the Co-op's motto of cooperatives building a better world, it demands of us to show and justify how the cooperative sector provides better or other outcomes than, for instance, public sector, private sector, the voluntary community sector, because the cooperative sector is something in the middle. It has a lot of different purposes. So yeah, I think I will skip this because this is so Birchall again, he came back and looked, but this is a bit old, but he looked at the progress of cooperative principles. I think there is still a lot of debate in the cooperative movement around how we can improve the implementation of our cooperative principles, both when it comes to governance, diversity, and care for community. So I'm not going to go down that route, but I wanted to talk about the case for using theory in cooperative studies. Oops. And that is, there are, if we read kind of academic articles from the management discipline, for instance, often they will also use case studies, and then they will present a theory around how a certain element works or doesn't work. And or a theory that explains how something or explains something that's happening. And it's these theories, they can provide explanatory frameworks to understand how governance, decision-making, and innovation happens in cooperatives. And by using, and often in cooperative studies, you only have one case. And one of the benefits of strengthening the theoretical foundation in your case is that then you can look at other articles or other case studies done in the investor-owned companies or in small family-owned business and so on. And then you can start using your theory to make comparisons, even though you just have your own case. And in that sense, we can start looking at what is the distinguishing factors in cooperatives that distinguish them from other organizations, and how can theories help us clarify the importance of cooperative values and principles and how it is manifested in the organization and how that is different to other types of organizations. Because I think we in the cooperative sector, we kind of know, you know, of course, corporate principles are important. So we already know that. But the other researchers don't know, and they don't understand maybe how this has an implication inside the organization, inside a cooperative organization. Yeah, I'll come back to a little bit back to the issue of theory. There are many types of case studies, descriptive, and I started by saying that I have read quite a lot of descriptive case studies, and they are, of course, really important, and they are often very important for the sector, and often they don't really relate to a theory. So they are a clear description, but often they have an objective. So they want to look at member participation or democratic governance and so on. But they lack the theory to explain it and compare it to another organization that maybe doesn't have democratic decision making in their setup. Exploratory means that you can start with a case study and kind of not have a theory, but you can develop theory or start to assess if you, what shall I say, can explain what you are seeing, observing in your case using a theory. And the last type is an explanatory case study where you are using theoretical frameworks to understand what is happening. I would say that a lot of management research is explanatory often because you start with a theory and you try to explain it. I'm not saying that's the only one to go by, but I think, again, using theory is quite important for a wider audience. How am I doing for time, Naveen? Okay. Okay, I have, this is very heavy duty stuff to go through in such a short period of time. And I will distribute the slides so you will not, you can have a look at the slides afterwards. So co-op case studies, there are many ways of using theory. So you can build theory where you're trying to build new theories. I think that's very difficult. I think you really need to be an expert in many ways on how to do that. You can test a theory, you can extend a theory, you can challenge a theory, and you can also discover mechanisms through theory. And this little list of examples is, for instance, research on Mondragon was where they extended the theory on what are hybrid organizations. What's a hybrid cooperative organization, for instance? Theory testing, Grameen Bank is an example of that, where it was considered unviable to lend money to people who had very low incomes. But Grameen Bank kind of proved the opposite. So that was testing a theory, and it was knocked back. Cooperatives in transition economies, like in Eastern Europe, but maybe also here in the Asia Pacific, in some countries where cooperatives are changing as the economies are changing. We can see how that how it relates to maybe changing political circumstances, wealth, and so on. Yeah, theory challenging. We can look at how does co-op's dual purpose impact governance and ethics in comparison to an investor-owned company, for instance. How does that kind of work? And then there's different ways of examining more agile, tech-oriented co-ops and how they use technology and not following a straight route, so to speak. So as you can see, there are many ways of using theory. Yeah. I'm coming back to the key elements for a good cooperative case study, because this is kind of like a, what should I say, a list of contents. And I think it's important because this is kind of a standard case study format. And I think when I was reviewing case studies last year, one of the things that was also important to strengthen was the selection, the rationale for selecting your case. What is the rationale for the case? What is it? Is it unique, or is it representative for a sector? If it is a comparative case study, how have you decided to select multiple cases? Are they similar or are they contrasting? Same or different sectors, etc. I think there can be done more work in describing this. I think a lot of cases are quite good on contextual detail, but again, I think that can be that is really important for us to understand the institutional setup of every co-op within the country context. And then the third point, which I have already talked a lot about, anchor your case in theory so that we can contribute, your case contributes to a broader academic discussion. I think also we can strengthen methodology transparency, as we talk about. So explain what you're doing, explain how you've done it, explain what the limitations are. Maybe you made a mistake. It's okay. You know, we want transparent research. We want to say, oh, maybe I should have had more women and less men as respondents. Maybe, you know, but it's important with transparency around this, because that shows that you are a good and serious, what should I say, conscientious researcher. And then I would stress applied and practical outcomes. Because we talk about improving theoretical contribution, it doesn't mean that you say goodbye to applied and practical outcomes. I think that's still very important because it should be also relevant to the co-op sector. And then last, like all case studies, it is good and compelling to have a good story, you know, and I think many of the cases I've read have a good story, because there are amazing stories in the Asia-Pacific region, and we just need to get them out and in the public sphere. Yeah, I think I'll drop this one. Except I will quote Yin, who is the very famous case study professor. He defines theory as a theory can be perceived as a hypothetical explanation about why acts, events, structure, and thoughts occur. It is important when you look into theory that you use these theories from your own discipline. It's simpler because then you can find other cases using the same theories, and then you can start from a foundation. And you can also use several or one or rival theories to explain what is happening to kind of develop some kind of critical discussion and analysis. I think I'm out of time, Naveen, am I not? I think so. I think we need to... I can't hear you.
You just have 1 more minute to complete.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay. So I'll leave you with these. This is quite a good read, Flyvberg. He talks about 5 misunderstandings of what case studies are not. Okay. I want you to do some read of that in your own leisure, so to speak. But I also wanted to advertise for all the Co-op research events that are happening in this year. We have 4 Cooperative Research Conference and more, but these are the ones I'm aware of. One in Helsinki in June, the Global Cooperative Research Conference in Montreal in July. We have the ICA Asia Pacific Research Conference in Colombo, Sri Lanka in November. And we have the a dedicated research conference on comparative cooperative research being held in Osaka, Japan in October. And I think it's fair to say, Naveen, that we have worked to develop more co-op colloquiums so we can build networks of cooperators and researchers in this form, in this online form. But also through emerging researcher workshops in these research conferences. I would also like to point at a couple of big research-based books on cooperatives. One is an Elsevier edited research volume, which will be launched, we hope, in Osaka, and dedicated only to cooperatives in the Asia-Pacific region. Likewise, there has been a launch in Europe of one research, the Routledge Handbook of Cooperative Economics and Management last year. And I know that there will be another, I think it's a handbook, but I'm not sure the full title. I'll get back to you. But at least there is a lot of cases and research coming out. So there should be a lot of readings that is available, or cases that is available for you to use in your research. So I'm hoping that these co-op dialogues and all the other events that the Asia Pacific Committee is organizing, that we can create a research forum and network so we can help each other produce cooperative research with a wider impact. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sidsel. So this was our first session. Now, moving forward to our main speaker for the day, we have with us Dr. Garry Cronan. Dr. Garry Cronan is research affiliate at University of Sydney, and is coming with the experience of more than 40 years around the cooperative sector in both the international and national and international domain. So he has worked with Australia's largest membership-based cooperatives and NSW government, and establishing Australia's first university-based cooperative research center that they call ACORD. And he has been instrumental in launching the global 300 research project, which was focused on cooperatives. So with that, I would like to invite Dr. Garry Cronan to take the floor. Dr. Garry.
Well, thank you very much. I just want to check, is my screen up? Am I sharing correctly?
Yes, you're on.
Okay, great. Look, the follow-on from that earlier, the description and explanation about case studies, I'm more focused on comparative research in the sense of you at a more macro level. So that's what my main contribution, I hope, to today's meeting will be. It's around comparative research. There are elements of sort of national level case studies in it. But there's a number of points in there about the effectiveness of and the forcefulness, I think, the power of comparative studies. So that's what I'm hoping to cover today. The The way I'm doing that is by drawing down on my recent research, which was in relation to scale and size in large cooperatives. The title of my thesis was Hidden Giants, so I'm using my research to highlight an approach to comparative research which can embed case study methodologies within it, although mine is slightly at a higher macro level. I've got a few slides on why I think it's important for researchers to appreciate scale. I'd like size and scale to be an area of concern for cooperative researchers in the future. I talk about my research approach. I do a summary of my methodology and then the key trends. So right at the bottom, I say the focus is more on comparative research at a macro level across countries than individual case studies. So just bear that in mind if you wouldn't mind. So why would I use comparative research to answer my research question? Well, here is my research question. And it was basically about examining and understanding the success, sustainability or failure of the largest cooperative businesses in the world. But an important point for me was to embed that in a broader understanding of the movement itself. And I touch on that in a number of points. So why is scale important? Well, large co-ops are an under-researched area. It hasn't been a focus. It's been rather more implicitly dealt with rather than explicitly dealt with in co-op research, but there is a research gap there. For those people who may be operating in the discipline of business history, you'll know the rather famous work of Alfred Chandler of a couple of generations ago on scale and scope in multinational companies. So it's been a way into understanding corporate behaviour in the past, but not so much cooperative behaviour. And I'd suggest that size can be helpful because you can test various theoretical explanations by looking at the data on size and growth and scaling. And then in essence, the life cycle, possible degeneration. Degeneration of cooperatives goes way back to Beatrice Webb at the turn of the 20th century, who first raised that issue, the inevitability of the decline of co-ops, and that's picked up in the life cycle. Large co-ops, as you'll see, are also a significant percentage of the global movement, and they're also still very competitive in their traditional industry sectors and against large multinationals. So my suggestion is that by a better understanding of large co-ops, you'll be able to deal with the proposition that is sometimes presented that it's only small co-ops that are good. They're the ones that are pure. They're the ones that fully embed and understand cooperative principles. And as you scale and become more complex, you lose some of that ideology and commitment. I want to beg to differ in some of my research. So size does not necessarily diminish values and acceptance and acting on cooperative values. Another point, most large co-ops start off small. The co-op model is a slow growth model. It takes a while to develop, so you need time. But the fact that most co-ops start off small and then can show survivability and longevity challenges a lot of the more traditional economic theory, which suggests that co-ops are inefficient and should disappear simply because of competition in the marketplace. Large co-ops are the way most people connect with large co-ops are the way governments and people most connect with co-ops. They're out there, they're the organisation that most people will be able to point to as a co-op. Whether they succeed and how they behave, therefore, is critical to the reputation and the profile of the movement. And also, it's in the area, large co-ops, primary level co-ops operationalise co-op principles. Apexes define them. That's the great strength of the co-op movement, is that the apexes define their own identity and therefore give that umbrella for cooperative operation. But large co-ops are particularly unique in the way in which their adaptation and their competitiveness and their sort of structure and governance arrangements as they adapt to competition and use hybrid structures can actually challenge cooperative identity. So they're a testing ground for competitiveness and cooperative values. So what was my research approach? And why is a comparative approach so useful? The first proposition is, I'd suggest, they're the same but different. So in other words, one of the things that connect us, and I understand there are probably about 20 countries or so represented in the audience today, and one of the things that connects all of us in our own countries is that we subscribe to a common set of cooperative values, the same set, if you like. But there are differences, and the differences are manifest and played out and constructed and mediated by the local circumstances, the culture, the institution, the national arrangements, the policy, the other players in the marketplace. So they're the same but different. So when you're doing comparative research, you've got a laboratory of how the same set of principles can be applied in different settings. Now, comparative analysis, particularly in what I did, was really about empirical data. And it's all driven by the availability of timely, compatible, and consistent data, longitudinal data in my case, and a discrete cohort. And the ability to follow that over time really opens a lot of insights into cooperative structures. The difference between a photo and a video, you get to see it changing over time. Now, the approach I adopted was a historical institutional comparative approach, but it's been used in many instances in cooperative research. The ICA itself in the Asia Pacific office was one of the first to do these comparative studies of policy and legislation over the last couple of decades, pioneering work in many ways. The EU's contribution with their support for the farmers study, about 80 studies, separate studies, common methodology, institutional approach, individual case studies of firms, individual case studies of countries, individual case studies of industry. You want to look at that sort of levels of case study operation. That's a very, very good place to go. The ICA itself attempted to also understand, put scaffolding, intellectual and theoretical scaffolding around some of the top 300 type activities by looking at a range of other metrics globally. So that was an exploratory study in 2016, and there were a range of other work. Virtual's already been mentioned. He's done a lot of work, but he's done work on governance and size and longevity, and Jason Spicer in some recent work as well. So I've also borrowed a little from a couple of other approaches. One is the varieties of capitalism literature, which was in fact one of the informing ones in that book of about 5 years ago, looking in the Asia Pacific area at particular countries and their performance. And there's a new edition of that coming as well. So that's one way of understanding. Just as there's a variety of capitalism, there are varieties of adaptation of co-ops to the particular national circumstances. Also, the second point there is about business history, and it's suggested that it occupies a particular position between micro and macro explanations of economic growth and performance. And the researcher goes on to say, business history in the broadest sense includes everything about our business past, from the history of individual firms to entire business systems. In other words, business history sits within a wider ecosystem or historical context. So when you're doing individual case studies, you put them in a wider context. I'm coming from the top down, individual ones can come from the bottom up. There's another aspect too, which is why history is important. And I put the quote of William Faulkner there, which says, the past isn't dead, it isn't even past. There's a lot of path dependency. There's a lot of what has gone before shaping what is present and in future. So history plays a large part. We look back to the cooperative principles, we share that common identity, and we meld together different traditions. A longer term historical view also enables us to see what works in the long term. There's no hiding from the effects of time. You know that as you get older, I'm afraid, it proves what works. So also the ICA itself is quite old, 1895, and that apex grew up, and national and sectoral apexes have grown up at the same time that the individual large co-ops have grown up. So they've not just grown up as individual businesses, but they've grown up as part of a movement. What you get is a business embedded in a social movement, and that's quite unique. So I use an analogy to describe that, the forest and the paddock. What you get with the forest is a density. You get a diversity, you get a biodiversity. You get the old growth, old co-ops. You get the middle growth, the middle-aged co-ops. You get the young fledgling ones. You get a rich sort of, there's a symbiotic, a symbol, there's a lot going on there which informs and enables each other. Now, the Australian situation, for example, was more like that paddock with a scattered few big trees, the remnants of what was a forest in the past. So what we should be going towards and understanding is more that dense forest. Now, quickly on methodology. What I did was a comparative historical institutional approach, drawing on several disciplinary perspectives. I employed a mixed method, quant and qualitative. I focused on a specific population subject to certain criteria. My analytical lens was size, absolute, and relative. Account was taken of how they fitted within the wider demography and the ecology of the national, the political economy, if you like, I just mentioned. My principal period of analysis was the decade 2010 to 2020, and that's the latter part of neoliberalism. The unit of analysis was more at the macro and meso, the country level, but I did take account of the individual firm level as well. I did that by taking the 300, the top 300. As was said, I initiated the Global 300 project when I worked for the ICA. I believe very, very strongly in data. I think the co-op movement needs data. It needs to have these stats so it can prove its case, so it can more effectively analyze its performance. But what I did was I added together, created a longitudinal data set, and then I went to where the national listings exist, and then I did a comparison between the national level and the global level. I used a lot of secondary sources, principally cooperative annual reports. Let me tell you, I read thousands. Now, that is an untapped resource, absolutely untapped researcher's resource. And in terms of focus, I looked at internal factors. You can see a range of them there. Governance, hybrid equity, isomorphism, business models, movement history, path dependency, historical legacy, degree of agency, leadership's important, and external factors, neoliberalism, regulatory environments. And finally, I followed two principal frameworks, the EU study and the other one, the doing business. So it was largely data-driven. So what are some of my key findings? Now, the first is that the top 300 are the living history of the global movement. It contains the DNA of numerous earlier generations of co-ops. Many are over 100 years old, and they're almost universally the result of numerous mergers over years. As I said, most start off small, but you get the collective DNA because they keep merging. That's where cooperation amongst cooperative most plays out, in mergers. It's a totally universal factor. My research also highlighted that the largest are on average the oldest. So what you get is the old ones keep surviving and keep growing. And that's important because it shows survivability, viability, competitiveness, and it shows their capacity to weather various business cycles and a whole range of things. They are for the long term. There's slow growth, but they get to be large growth. Now, in terms of countries, approximately 28 countries were represented. The top 5 with the largest representation were France, USA, Germany, Japan, and the Netherlands, comprising a bit over 70% of the total 300 revenue. These are averaged out figures over that decade, right? The next 13 countries have around 25% of the revenue, and the bottom 10 countries contribute about 2.6% of the total. There are 28 countries in the top 50 economies on nominal GDP. So the top 300 are drawn from the top 50 economies. New Zealand is the bottom of that listing. There are 5 countries from among the top 20 GDP economies: China, Russia, Mexico, Indonesia, and Iran. Now, I understand at least a couple of countries are represented today from that group, which, although they each have cooperatives of varying size, strengths, and commensurate histories, don't have representation in the nominal 300 listing. So 22 of the 28 countries are members of the OECD. 6 others, India, Brazil, Argentina, Singapore, Malaysia, and Saudi, are not, although Indonesia, Brazil, Malaysia, and Saudi are members of the BRICS. The countries in the top 300 are therefore advanced or rapidly developing economies. Larger, sustainable cooperatives of this size are not a feature of less developed or poorer economies, quite the reverse. However, there are some economies which punch above their weight. Now, when you look at respective GDP ranking and you look at respective top 300 listing, you can see Finland does very well. So does New Zealand. So does Denmark. You want these slides afterwards, I'm happy to provide those. Norway, Switzerland, Austria, Netherlands, Sweden, all comparatively small economies, but doing better. There's a real research issue around the size of the economy and the comparative size of cooperatives' ability to grow large in those small economies. So that I haven't got time to go into all the things that fall out of this research, but that's a point worth noting. The other thing is the ICA, in doing their top 300, also do a purchasing parity listing of the top 300. India and Colombia, for example, move up considerably higher, but my research has been based mainly on nominal GDP. The top 300 often reflect the history of the movement. So what that means is, because the dairy separator was invented, I think, in Denmark, you get dairy co-ops starting there, right? You get rural and urban banking coming out of Germany. You get insurance out of the UK and the US, and also consumer co-ops out of the UK. So in fact, some of the most economically advanced, innovative economies are also home to some of the largest. That means they have some of the most competitive large companies, and co-ops can compete in that situation. There's no need to apologise for cooperative performance in that case. Now, there's a concentration in countries, but there's also a concentration in industries. The traditional industry sectors are agriculture, insurance, wholesale and retail, and banking. The first 2 account for around about 70% of the revenue, and the other 2 added together, so the 4, 95%. While small co-ops exist across a wide variety of industry sectors, cooperatives and mutuals seemingly only scale and survive in a few industry sectors. There are exceptions, Mondragon and others, but that seems where the organic growth is. So while it appears that these are traditional industry areas for co-ops, and it sends something of a limit to where large co-ops can scale over the long term, whether they actually do then depends on the policies, the legislation, the history, the strength of the movement and leadership in the individual countries. So, and also, as I said before with the forest analogy, density and clustering, geographic clustering, help performance. Now, just a couple of global comparisons. The revenue for 2019 for the top 300 was 2.18, which now I've worked out, I've approximated the total turnover for the global movement in that year. And my estimation is that about 46% of the global movement which has 3 million cooperatives and mutuals in it, is represented by the top 300. In other words, 0.1% of the businesses represent not far off 50% of the total revenue. Now, also to go to the bottom dot point there, it's also estimated that if you compare large co-ops to large multinationals through the Fortune 500 listing, the large co-ops, the top 300, account for about 2.5% of the Fortune 500 listing. That's conservative. They miss out about 10 or 12 of the 300, some of the big ones too. And I've also gone on to estimate that around about 5.4% of the top of the co-op movement is the figure for the global GDP. So basically, co-ops are a bit over between 5 and 6% of global GDP. That's the whole movement. Another series of quick points. Co-op values, talking the talk and walking the talk. I'll just go back here for a moment. I also quickly deal with formations, growth, and movement life cycle. But onto the talking the talk. I looked at all those annual reports I talked about. And what you find is that my proposition was that the larger the co-op, maybe the less it talks about values. Co-ops, big co-ops bad. Wasn't the case. In fact, the more they reported on their values, the bigger they were. So it's not size that decides, it's the country that decides. I looked at their representation in their national, sectoral, and then the global apexes. And around about half of those top 300 have representation in their respective national, sectoral, or global apexes in one way or another. And there's a large group of mutuals which really skew that. The figure is much higher for co-ops as such. So, and amongst some of the co-ops, there are some which I call cooperative champions who really go to just about every co-op organisation. They're in their local national organisation, the national sectoral organisation, the regional Asia Pacific organisation. They go to they're a member of the ICA, the global sectoral ones. So there are some really strong advocates. So overall, size doesn't diminish values generally, okay? The other important thing I wanted to talk about was formations. Now, this is at the other end of the life cycle. Formations in those mature cooperative economies, the top 300 economies, are quite static. They're not really developing in the same way that earlier stages of formation, the bursts of energy that resulted in. It's a steady state, right? And what is, they're largely stable, basically. And so there's limited growth. There's growth in co-op revenues and assets, but that's all occurring in the large ones. So that's an important issue because the movement itself is not replenishing itself in those mature cooperative economies, okay? That's an important point to come out of this work. So the effect is that new co-ops will probably only be offsetting or replacing the merging, commercially failing, or demutualizing cooperatives. Now, the top 300 were basically across those traditional industries. Now, they all occurred roughly within a generation of each other in those respective countries. But what has been happening with the current formations is that there's not a consistent pattern of formation. So you're not getting new industries being regularly formed in all of these countries. It's patchier. So the movement that gave rise to the formation of these traditional industry sectors is not being replicated in new formations, in new industry sectors in these countries, which really means we've reached a mature phase in some of these economies. Demutualisation was particularly effective in knocking over a lot of co-ops, in particular Australia, UK, Japan, Canada, and the US. And just on demutualisation, and people can look at some of the detail here, but one of the points about it is that the one researcher highlighted that you're far less likely to demutualise if you're part of the dense forest than if you're in the paddock. The other point was that the individual co-op demutualising is often the end result of a movement which is in what one researcher has called cultural demutualisation. In other words, the values are less informing, are less motivating, and the movement is not recreating a movement, it's just creating individual co-ops. So what gave rise to what we've currently got of these large co-ops and successful co-ops was driven by a lot of motives and enthusiasm in earlier generations. We're not seeing the same widespread, consistent motivation occurring now. So growth and mergers. Overwhelmingly, mergers have been the preferred growth strategy. That's what the top 300 have done. They've done that deliberately and they're consolidated. So it's the dominant thing right across the industry sectors, right across every country. It's arguable that part of the survival of the various largest cooperatives and mutual businesses has been and continues to be their ability to merge. Limitations, however, there is a limit to this merger strategy. And that's not only competition policy in some countries, but you're running out of co-ops to merge with. So basically, that's a problem. So one of the solutions could be that you have to acquire acquisitions, not mergers. But the problem with that is you have to get outside equity, so that can challenge. And the mix and the balance of power within the co-ops can change if you've got too much outside business coming in that's not grown up as cooperatives. So the movement has a challenge because one of the consequences of this continuous merger process and consolidation process is that you can end up with one or two national or even multinational co-ops, where formerly you had a co-op movement. You take India with the dairy co-ops and the multitudinal levels of dairy co-ops and their federated structures and their growth. You have a look at some countries, you end up with one or two cooperatives just being big businesses, not a dairy movement. So that's the logical consequence of continuous mergers. And secondly, there's also, and I examine this in my research, another researcher has suggested that one of the reasons that, for example, the Dutch agricultural cooperatives have survived is because where in the past cooperatives have traditionally built second-tier cooperative business structures to deal with business beyond the primary level, what the Dutch ag co-ops did was they collapsed those structures back down into unitary level cooperatives. So in other words, their competitive business strategies of survival have been in part based on dismantling cooperative architecture, which they helped develop in the first place. So one of the consequences of all of those different trends is that I suggest that rather than an individual life cycle for a cooperative firm, which was one of my theoretical frameworks that I used in my analysis, what we should think about and what I started to develop was a movement-wide life cycle. So you can see that there are some cooperative movements which are so consolidated, so mature, and so in steady state, then you've got to compare those to other perhaps emerging economies which are an earlier stage of the co-op movement, which have much more denser, in some senses, more energetic and lively cooperative movements occurring. So a movement life cycle gives you an analytical tool to help understand and place either country or individual case studies within that wider context. So my conclusion, comparative research can help you as a researcher, as a practitioner, but also as the movement to better know itself. So while co-op and mutual organisations have faced and overcome limits in the past, there are perhaps a set of new challenges, consolidation and concentration, which challenge not only individual co-ops, but the movement itself. Such trends are more fully visible and understood when the leading edge of some of these trends can be compared to the wider movement across countries, culture, and stages of the respective country movement life cycle. These are all various pieces of a bigger, more complete jigsaw. So the starting point is then knowing thyself. I hope I've shown that gaining a better understanding of large co-ops is part of this process of reflexivity. Comparative research can help deliver this self-awareness. And that's the end.
Thank you, Dr. Garry. Yeah, it was very insightful. So now it is time for some open discussion, some question and answer for our participants to have. So if I may request anyone can raise their hand if they have any queries for today's session. Yes. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Naveen?
Yes.
May I speak?
Yes, yes, please. We can hear you. Yes. Please.
Hello, Garry.
Hi,
I'm
Akira.
Akira from Japan. I'm sorry I couldn't take part from the beginning, and sometimes my communication was interrupted. Anyhow, you have made a very good speech, and I'd like to have the copy of your presentation. And you have mentioned very important aspects of cooperative research, the comparative research. That is what we are doing in many places, in many sectors. And that is what we have done in the past 10 years. 2013 or 14, we started to collect some researchers from several countries, and we have published a book in 2020 that is called the Awakening the Asian Pacific Cooperative Potential. That means the Asian cooperatives have the great possibility, but that is just remaining as a potential. And now we are editing the second book, which will be published at the end of this year. And I am now finalizing the editing process, and I'm writing now epilogue of this book, and I'd like to take many ideas from your presentation. So that is what I wish to have from your permission to cite your presentation. You have mentioned many various aspects of cooperative research, that is comparative research or life cycle or the degeneration or renewal of the cooperatives, which we have witnessed in this decades. So there are many things we have to discuss, but not coming into details in your discussion, I'd like to invite you to come to Osaka this October when we shall organize the IYC International Year of Cooperatives related event in Osaka, Tokyo, that is now hosting the World Expo from the middle of April to middle of October. But just after this expo, we organize the International Symposium by researchers of the cooperative studies. And I do hope you can come to join us to give your presentation. And you have already contributed a paper to our second book that will be published at the end of this year. But I do hope you can join us to give us a great impetus, great stimuli to the Asian and Western researchers. So that is what I wish to. I wish you to come to Osaka to join us to share your knowledge with us. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Akira, for your kind words. I'll do my best in relation to the research conference. I mentioned in passing your book, and I think I'm not sure if you caught it, maybe it dropped in and out, but I also acknowledge the role of the ICA Asia Pacific, in particular, the regional directors' continuing roles in doing comparative policy and legislation, which I think is a credit to the Asia Pacific area, and in a sense pioneered some of this comparative stuff. My contribution is more around the data, around the stats, and getting a discrete group of countries together. I think so I acknowledge the leading role that Asia Pacific have played. I think in the period of big data and AI and whatever, I think there is an immense opportunity to really do this comparative work. I think it really shines a light on what works, and for a couple of reasons. One is we can get the overall framework and analytical framework more correct based on the empirical data and whatever, and then the granulated understanding of the individual case studies and countries. And what that, I think, will help is not to go ahead in areas of likely failure, because what I think is, in the context of what's happening globally, the uncertainty, the whole range of things that are happening, that basically we haven't got resources to waste. And what I think we should really be putting our effort in to are new areas to build like the traditional industry areas, so that over generations we can re-energize and reinvigorate the cooperative movement and make it relevant. So it's not only how to do it better, but it's how not to make mistakes. And I think that is quite an important point too.
Yes, thank you, Professor Akira, for your comments, and thank you, Dr. Garry, for addressing that. Yeah, any further questions? Anyone else want to ask any question?
Sidsel, you can speak.
Akira, I spoke before you came, I think.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Sorry.
yes. That's okay. I did also advertise for the Osaka conference. But I do think, what shall I say, a few reflections on Garry's presentation. I mean, it's mind-blowing the amount of data that you have collected and the longitudinal data. But I did, just because we are talking about theory, I did, you call it approaches, but I probably would call them theories that you have used in different ways, varieties of capitalism, path dependence, and so on. These are theories that can be used in single cases as well, to some extent anyway. So I noted that you have used a lot of different theories or approaches, as you call them, and I think that's good for us as researchers to think about how you can use those kind of approaches in such a huge project that you have undertaken. I think it would be interesting to study more closely the big co-ops in the Asia Pacific region, to have a dedicated study maybe around that, to see and maybe dig in to see what are, and Akira, you would be interested in this, what are differences in context and policy and so on, and how does that impact on the what should I say, the survival and what should I say, the success of these big co-ops? Because I mean, India has many large ones, even though they are not on the top, on the list of the top 300. I think it would be interesting to have more research on these big co-ops in the Asia Pacific region. Yeah, and Japan as well. Yeah.
You may know that the Indian cooperatives are ranked #1 and #2 in terms of turnover per GDP per capita. So in this regard, the first one is IFCO, second one is AMU, both Indians. They are top twos in the statistic ICS Global 300.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I mentioned in passing that I'd used nominal GDP because most of the other external data that I drew tends to use nominal GDP. But I think it's a very important point because I didn't make it in the presentation, but there's another point, which is that for the emerging economies, what happened with the European economies, the settler economies, North America, Australia, New Zealand, was that there was a slow tide of economic growth rising, and co-ops rose in that tide, and they had sufficient time to do it. What the interesting challenge for the co-op movement is that going forward, the emerging economies, in some cases, are growing very rapidly, and they're growing rapidly without an established cooperative base to rise up in that tide. So I think the Asia Pacific area would be a particularly good one to look at in the context of economies as they're rising and the state of the co-op sector in that country. Now, India is a bit different, given the dairy and given the banking, rural banking and whatever. It's been long enough and embedded enough to actually rise with the economy. But in some other countries, they're rapidly growing and co-ops aren't there. They're not in the action so much. They're quite marginal. So they don't necessarily have that capacity to maintain that presence. And what that means is as a percentage of global GDP, the co-op movement's going to go down simply because the emerging economies are going up and the mature economies, the old OECD economies, are pro rata going down in terms of the world economy. So the co-op movement is maybe finding itself gradually in decline. You could almost say maybe it's getting close to a ceiling. It's certainly a steady state arrangement in the mature economies, I'd suggest. So it's an interesting challenge for researchers and practitioners to understand how co-op development can occur in the context of emerging economies.
Can I just comment on the GDP per capita? I mean, the impact those Indian co-ops have had on more people, or a substantial part of the population, is itself a tremendous example of cooperative, what should I say, values, and getting people, helping support people out of poverty. And I think that in itself is also an important element that needs to be further studied going forward.
Great.
Yes, we have Mr. Babul to, Mr. Babul, please ask your question.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Here I am from Nepal. So thank you very much for the very good initiation of this kind of presenting of this kind of resource-based presentation of this meeting. So thank you very much to the both presenter also. So this is very, very, very emerging issue. So let me tell about the condition of Nepalese research system or the experiment or experiences, particularly in terms of cooperatives, because here we don't have so much research in cooperative sector in Nepal. And there are so many ups and downs nowadays, and we have just amended our Cooperative Act, which was promulgated in 2017, but again it was amended recently in 2024 December. And yes, in the presentation of Dr. Garry, I heard about the merging, merging is small and beautiful, and you have also mentioned about the merging, and when the cooperatives are merged among each other, maybe they will be more stronger, and their economy of scale is also very wider, and their services will also be expanded. Yes, it is very well. And in Nepal also we have emphasized on this issue, but the cooperatives are very much reluctant here to do so, to do so here. So from the government side also, from the policy side also, the government has not also encouraged to the cooperatives to be merged among each other. And due to the too much politicization in the cooperative sector, also is people want to be elected and to have the position or something like that. Yeah. So on this issue also, we need to have some kind of research and why so we will have the better condition of the cooperative if we merge among each other, and through the comparative study, as through the merging, like in Australia or the Japan, maybe I know Japan, maybe there were more than 1,400 agricultural cooperatives previously. Nowadays, there are only 500 agricultural cooperatives by merging each other, and they have increased their economy of scale also. So we have to educate people from our literature, from our publication, that why the merging is very much essential, and how they merge each other, and how they got economy of scale, and how they solve the people or the members each other. So in the future also, this is just my my suggestion, that we this research committee, as I am one of a member of this research committee, yes, I would also suggest that we have to emphasize on this kind of documentation, merging, why the merging is necessary, and how we have to merge, yes, and how the other countries like Japan or Australia or other countries have been benefiting from the merging. Yes, that kind of exploration is very much needful. Yes, through the comparative study, like Dr. Gray mentioned here. Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bawal, for your comments. We have Dr. Neha from India. Yeah, please, Dr. Neha, you can ask a question.
Thank you, Professor Garry, for your presentation. It was very informative and very insightful. I'm also thankful to Sidsel. It's always, you know, it's enlightening to enlightening to hear you. The way you connect us with different examples, especially in the Asia Pacific region. Um, I especially wanted to talk about the Indian dairy cooperatives. My work is focused on the Indian dairy cooperatives, and I have been studying the aspect of social capital and democratic governance. So, I feel that, from your presentation, of course, I realize that it is very important to understand the journey and survival of the communities and the members that have been involved in this cooperative journey. But at the same time, in country like India and China, where we have a huge population and we have a journey, at the same time, we also should acknowledge the diversity that we have in our country. Like the more number of people, the more communities are getting involved in the cooperative sector. So how are we documenting it? How are we maintaining, preserving this diversity? How are we dealing with this heterogeneous groups that we have in cooperatives at the moment? Also, the profit aspect of cooperative is given a lot of importance. But then when we talk about the member benefits at the grassroots level, when we talk about farmers benefits, what are the actual benefits do they have? Like what is the gap between the profit when we talk about the profit of the big cooperatives, and then what is the you know what are the benefits, what are over the period of time, as and when we are changing and we are talking about the GDP, what are the benefits of these communities, also the farmers communities that are actually the backbone, we can say, of these cooperatives. So I feel that these are some of the areas that we need to focus during our research when we do it on this big cooperatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Neha. So yeah, we are running out of time. So before we close, I just wanted to put 1 to 2 questions that participants had mentioned while registering for the session. So first, starting with the question related to comparative analysis only. I think Dr. Garry just addressed it, but again, if you can briefly mention about this. The question is how to compare cooperatives from emerging markets with those in developed countries, considering the vast contextual differences. Yes, Dr. Garry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you suggesting that as for me to
Yes,
put forward a view? Yeah. Look, my focus was around the top 300, and so I went to them, and the countries fell out of that listing. Right? It was a fairly crude measure of income, but it is a start. It gives you a longitudinal data set. And then it gives you a reason to examine those economies and try and understand the similarities and the differences in those developing economies. So then you've got another set of possible, if you like, co-ops that are just below that don't get into that 300, but particularly using PPP rather than nominal GDP, right? So the importance is understood in the national context. But one of the things you need is you need national level data, right? So you need those national listings, right? Now, the French do it every 2 years. They do a very good breakup of their sectors. They've got very detailed, their national federation is very good in the compiling of that data. A number of other countries are as well. One of the key things I would suggest is to try and get some of these emerging economies to try and generate similar data sets, right? In such a way that you can then track progress over time to see where they're responding to member need in the various markets and whatever. And then you can do a comparison on emerging or mature economies or developed economies. So the starting point for me, if you're following a similar methodology to what I use, would be to try and get more countries to embrace that. I think Malaysia's got some listings. There are a number of other countries, but we would benefit so much if a common methodology was used at a national level, and if the regional office did that. I know there have been a number of initiatives. The ICA-EU partnership did a lot around policy and generating some stats and that. But I'm talking about more consistent national listings of organisational data, financial data. I think that would enable more detailed study in terms of the comparison between emerging and some of the problems that might be unique to emerging economies compared to others.
Thank you. Yes, Professor Kurimoto.
Yes, you have mentioned the importance of the statistics on cooperatives, and I'm now serving on the steering committee of the World Cooperative Monitor, and I'm responsible for Asian nations. And there are many problems. Even Japan, we had no uniform statistics on cooperatives. Individual ministry has its own statistics, but not for the whole cooperative. In some sectors, there is no statistics. And in case of agricultural cooperatives, they are very good statistics because half of the government's statistical officer is ministry, belonging to the Ministry of Agriculture. So, but recently, we have created the national data by the Japan Cooperative Alliance. 3 or 4 years ago, we have done to compile such as scattered statistics into one and calculated the, so to say, added values of turnover. That is very important to gauge the size of the economy of the cooperatives against GDP. So we have done. But there are many problems in Asia. For instance, China, the biggest population they had, but there is no statistics. These 3-4 decades, they always mention we had 100 million membership, but there is no membership in China, especially All China Federation of Supply and Marketing Cooperatives. There is no data because that is a government agency. So there is no data. And there is newly emerging cooperatives under the new law of 2006 that is called the Farmers Specialized Cooperatives. That has the potential to become real cooperative in China, but there is no statistics, no national federation as well. And in case of Korea, NACF, the huge organization, huge agribusiness and banking organization, but they never follow the methodology of global, so to say, the World Cooperative Monitor. They have done running not only the agribusiness, but also banking. And they have merged into these figures into one single figure. So that means now the NCE, National Agriculture Cooperative Federation, Korea, is much bigger than Japanese agriculture cooperatives. In fact, Japanese agriculture cooperatives is 4 times bigger than Korean one, but they never follow our instruction to give us the separate figures. So that is what I'm now facing. Every year, I am discussing with Korean or Chinese top leaders, but they never accomplish that to follow the methodology of World Cooperative Monitor to create the statistics that can be compared with other countries. That is a question which we have to solve in these years. So I do hope the ICA should take initiative, Naveen, to create such an comparable figures, stats of Asia Pacific cooperatives. That is the mission of the ICA-AP. So that is, I strongly urge you to take initiative to create the reliable database on the statistics in Asian Pacific cooperatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Korimoto. So, yes, sir. Yes, Dr. Sidsel.
Yeah, I was just Garry. I think there's been some requests for your comparative research. I wondered if your thesis is open access. Is it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yes, so it's possible we can add a link to your thesis if people are really keen to study the numbers. Would that be
Yes,
okay?
if they're having trouble sleeping at night, I'd recommend it.
Oh, it's very interesting, Garry. I think you are downplaying it. Yeah. Yeah, and I will also provide some extra references to the two research books that are coming for the Asia Pacific region, and also I'll find the ones that's coming out in Europe as well. I'll add that in the reference list. Okay.
Okay, yeah. So thank you, Dr. Sidsel. So yeah, just again, before we close, I think yeah, I have around 10 more questions, but I think we have already run out of time. So we would like to, what I will do is just share these questions to Dr. Garry and Dr. Sidsel, and we'll get back with the answers over mail. So just before we close, as Professor Korimoto is here with us, I would like to request him to provide some final comments. And while he is providing his comments, I have dropped one feedback form, a small feedback form. Participants may like to provide feedback to us so that we can keep on improving and yes, keep bringing some meaningful colloquiums further. Yeah, thank you. Yes, Professor Korimoto.
Okay, thank you for invitation.
Sorry for the interruption.
What's that? Okay. What I wish to say is that we should establish the network of researchers in Asia Pacific region, which that networking we have started just 10 years ago. And year by year, we are inviting more people, especially young people, into our group. So I do hope you can join us in the, organizing the research conference like this colloquium. It's very good initiative that is done in Asia Pacific office. And so I do hope we can continue such an process of sharing our research findings amongst Asian researchers. And finally, we can publish some kind of the books in the future. So I do hope, Naveen, you can take a lead in this direction.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Korimoto. Thank you for your comments. Yes, we will try to incorporate the comments that you have provided today. And yes, with in coordination with you, we will try to achieve that also. So as we are closing now, it's time to have some smiling faces on the screen. So I would request everyone to please switch on their cameras so that we can have a quick group pic. And yes, it would be good to have everyone is smiling so that we can post it on social media. Thank you. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Dr. Siva. Yes, please. Mr. Abdullah Khairy. Dr. Ankita, please, if you're available, please switch on your cameras. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you for joining today. And yeah, it was really insightful for me as well. And I hope it was insightful for everyone today. So again, we will come back with another session in the month of June. And yeah, so see you again in next 2 months. And as Dr. Sidsel mentioned that we are having Asia Pacific Research Conference in the month of November in Colombo, Sri Lanka this time. So I'm just dropping the conference website link in the chat box and hoping people will go through it and register and participate during the conference.
Thank you very much for organizing this very insightful events, and maybe we look forward to meet again in June. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Naveen. Thank you,
Thank you.
Sidsel. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Neha.
Me too. Nice to see you, Sidsel, after so long. Thank you.